Welcome to the Spoken Library. Today, we're exploring Shoe Dog, the memoir of Phil Knight, the founder of Nike. This is not your typical business success story filled with overnight victories and smooth sailing. Instead, it's a raw, honest account of building one of the world's most iconic brands through decades of struggle, near bankruptcy, and sheer determination. Phil Knight wrote this memoir at age 78, looking back on the crazy, improbable journey that took him from selling shoes out of his car trunk to creating a multi-billion-dollar empire. The title, Shoe Dog, is industry slang for someone utterly devoted to footwear, and Knight's story shows just how obsessed you need to be to turn a wild idea into reality. What makes this book remarkable is Knight's vulnerability. He doesn't present himself as a visionary genius who had it all figured out. Instead, he reveals the constant fear, self-doubt, and chaos that characterized Nike's early years. This is a story about persistence, about believing in something when no one else does, and about the team of misfits who helped build something extraordinary. Our story begins in 1962, when Phil Knight is a 24-year-old graduate of the University of Oregon with a degree in journalism and an MBA from Stanford. He's searching for his purpose, and like many young people, he's uncertain about his path. But he has one crazy idea that won't leave him alone. As a runner on Oregon's track team, Knight noticed that most running shoes were made by two German companies, Adidas and Puma. They were expensive and not particularly innovative. In a paper for his entrepreneurship class at Stanford, Knight proposed importing high-quality, low-cost running shoes from Japan to compete with the German brands. His professor gave him a good grade, but more importantly, the idea took root in Knight's mind. After graduation, Knight did what any uncertain young person might do. He took a trip around the world. When his journey brought him to Japan, he visited the Onitsuka Company, makers of Tiger running shoes. In a moment of improvisation that would change his life, he introduced himself as the representative of Blue Ribbon Sports, a company that didn't actually exist yet. The Japanese executives were impressed enough to make him their American distributor. Knight returned home with samples and a deal, but he had no money, no employees, and no real business. He was living with his parents and working as an accountant, a job he found soul-crushing. But he had his Tigers, and he had his former track coach, Bill Bowerman, who agreed to become his partner with a handshake and $500. Bowerman was a legend at Oregon, known for his unconventional training methods and his obsession with making better running shoes. This partnership, the young, uncertain Knight and the innovative, demanding Bowerman, became the foundation of what would eventually become Nike. The early years of Blue Ribbon Sports were defined by a single word: survival. Knight kept his accounting job during the day and sold shoes at track meets on weekends, literally working out of his car. Every dollar earned went back into buying more inventory. There was no salary for Knight, no fancy office, no business plan beyond sell more shoes. The company's growth was steady but precarious. Each year they sold more shoes, but each year they also needed more capital to buy inventory. Banks were skeptical of this young guy selling Japanese shoes and repeatedly denied him loans. Knight maxed out credit cards, borrowed from family and friends, and lived in constant fear of going bankrupt. Knight's relationship with Onitsuka in Japan was equally stressful. The Japanese company was demanding, often threatening to pull their distribution rights or to start selling directly in America, threatening Knight's entire business. Knight realized they had to break away and create their own brand. This was terrifying because it meant manufacturing their own shoes with no experience and limited capital. But it was also liberating. For the first time, they could build exactly what they wanted. They needed a name for this new company. Jeff Johnson suggested Nike after the Greek goddess of victory. Knight wasn't thrilled with it initially, but it was better than his own idea, Dimension 6. They needed a logo too, so Knight hired a graphic design student named Carolyn Davidson and paid her $35 for what would become one of the world's most recognizable symbols, the swoosh. The first Nike shoes hit the market in 1972. They were good shoes, but more importantly, they represented freedom. Knight and Bowerman could now innovate without constraints. Bowerman, ever the tinkerer, had been experimenting with a waffle iron in his kitchen, and this led to the creation of the Waffle Trainer, a revolutionary shoe with superior traction. It became a massive hit. But breaking free from Onitsuka meant legal battles. The Japanese company sued Blue Ribbon Sports, and Knight had to fight in court while simultaneously trying to grow his new Nike brand. The stress was overwhelming. Knight was battling suppliers, creditors, competitors, and now lawyers, all while trying to manufacture shoes and manage growth. Despite these challenges, Nike began to take off. They signed athletes to endorsement deals, most notably Steve Prefontaine, the charismatic distance runner who embodied the rebellious spirit Knight wanted for his brand. Pre, as he was known, wasn't interested in money. He just loved running and believed in what Nike represented. His tragic death in a car accident in 1975 devastated Knight personally and became a defining moment in Nike's culture. As Nike grew through the 1970s, the problems didn't get smaller, they just got more expensive. The company was perpetually undercapitalized, meaning they never had enough money to fund their growth. Every success created new challenges because they needed more inventory, more manufacturing capacity, more everything. The relationship with banks remained contentious. Knight described his banker as treating him like a criminal, constantly threatening to pull their line of credit. At one point, the bank did exactly that, forcing Knight into a humiliating scramble to find alternative financing. The company came within hours of collapse multiple times. Then there were manufacturing challenges. Nike relied on factories in Japan and later Taiwan and Korea. Managing relationships across cultures and time zones was complex and frustrating. Quality control issues emerged. Shipments arrived late or not at all. Currency fluctuations ate into already thin margins. Competition intensified as well. Adidas, seeing Nike's rise, fought back aggressively. They had more resources, better distribution, and established relationships. Knight felt like David fighting Goliath, except David was also fighting off creditors and struggling to pay roll. Internal tensions grew too. As the company expanded, Knight's original team of buttfaces clashed over strategy and direction. People who thrived in startup chaos struggled with corporate structure. Knight, by his own admission, was not a natural manager. He was introverted, avoided confrontation, and often communicated through memos rather than conversations. Yet through all this chaos, Nike kept growing. They expanded beyond running shoes into tennis, basketball, and other sports. They continued to innovate with new technologies and designs, and they built a brand identity centered on athletic performance and rebellious authenticity that resonated with consumers. A turning point came with Nike Air, a revolutionary cushioning system that used pressurized gas. This technology, combined with increasingly sophisticated marketing, helped Nike pull away from competitors and establish dominance in the athletic shoe market. By 1980, Nike had become the #1 athletic shoe company in America, surpassing Adidas. But Knight doesn't present this as a triumphant ending. He makes clear that success brought new pressures and responsibilities. The company went public in 1980, which finally solved their capital problems, but created new tensions. Now Knight had to answer to shareholders and Wall Street analysts who didn't understand or care about the company's culture and mission. The scrappy startup mentality had to evolve into professional corporate management. Knight reflects on the cost of this journey. He missed time with his young sons. His marriage endured strain. His health suffered from constant stress. Friends and colleagues burned out or left the company. The price of building Nike was measured not just in financial terms, but in personal sacrifice. Yet he also celebrates what they built, not just a company, but a culture. Nike became known for its innovation, its marketing creativity, and its connection to sports and athletes. The buttfaces who survived the journey became wealthy, but more importantly, they built something meaningful. Shoe Dog is ultimately a story about passion and persistence. Phil Knight didn't have all the answers. He made mistakes, faced rejection, nearly went bankrupt repeatedly, and operated in chaos for decades. What he had was an unshakable belief in his crazy idea and the courage to keep going when giving up would have been easier. Knight's advice to young people is simple: don't settle for a job you tolerate.